Hello, everybody. My name is August. I am your moderator for today. I'd like to welcome you all to another Agile IT webinar. Today's discussion is called Discover, Manage, and Protect Azure AD Applications, presented by Conrad Agermont, CEO of Agile IT. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will try to get to them at the end of today's webinar. So without further ado, Conrad, take it away.
All right. So this was a follow-up to another webinar that we did, a session that's out there. That one was really targeted, really specifically around those ISVs and vendors or internal application builders that were either moving their application from commercial into GCC high to meet kind of FedRAMP. What are the difference in the URLs? What do you have to do with the tenants? And that information is actually still valuable even if you're doing commercial, because talk a lot about being able to share application registration across different tenants. Good for ISVs, maybe good for partners. You're building some internal applications. But with that in mind, now it's, wait a minute, but I'm the IT manager or director or business owner, what have you. That's frightening. What do we do to really kind of protect those types of services that are out there? So really in today's webinar, we're going to focus on a few things, and we are specifically focused on Azure Active Directory application integration. There's more things that Azure Active Directory does in terms of single sign-on and SAML, and that's probably another webinar we're going to do. But this particular one is going to be those that directly tie into it. Two key areas: application registration and enterprise applications. Things that if you've gone into the portal, you've seen these. So we're going to go through a number of these areas. So this is a little preview of some of the kind of key recommendations, guidance I talk about. There's a lot of data to go through, and I'll give you kind of a rude and crude view of a Power BI that actually uses some of that data. I focus on right now only for application registration. But as you see, as you probably found, there's so much data that's in there. Some of those I'll give you a peek into it as we go along, but I'm going to walk through some of the key areas that go through it, including how do you not only see what the applications are there, but what are they doing, and give some guidance on how to move forward. So one of the things when you're doing your planning, kind of an open area, is that the application registrations, you're going to see it, and it's not just for developers. We tend to think that, oh, it's an ISV that's out there, or the kind of big powerful developer that creates things in Visual Studio and builds an app and needs a server or compute. But as you start to do more integration with things like Power Platform, Dataverse, Dynamics 365, even more, you're going to find that there's a lot of that integration to move through your application and control it through Azure Active Directory that's based on these application registrations. So sometimes you're going to build something, oh, we really want to automate something through Power Platform, Power Automate, that can handle some tasks, pull data. That needs application registration. And it's very easy to let that to start to slip away a little bit, because it could have been created by IT, could have been done through IT with developers. And I'm going to show a few things here to take a look at and what you need to be able to manage. The other part is around scoping, and I'll talk more about scoping later on in terms of delegation versus application, and why that is so important for an IT organization to protect these areas and know what permissions or what scope of permissions need to be applied for a given application, and then to monitor them. And lastly, around your certificates and secrets management, because for an application to work, it still needs to authenticate at some point. And we're going to talk about what those key parts of it. And it's something that for years in IT, we've had service accounts and there's a username and password. To some degree, this isn't that much different. We don't call it a password, but having a certificate and having the right information, I can authenticate, but there's ways to prevent that. But it requires consistent management, and it's tough because there's not a lot of great tools in there. There's some that we have, which I'll talk a little bit about, but these are some really key areas to plan these applications out and manage them. It's really easy to say, hey, we have a process and we go through it, but what about that application from 3 years ago, 2 months ago? Do we still need it? Is it being used? Do we need to rotate the certificate? Which ones are going to expire? So these are key things to look at. Now, in terms of scoping, there's delegated permissions and application permissions. So every time we go into the graph, you can automate this too, but thinking about the portal, and we're going to say we have this application and we need to give it permissions. Delegated permissions means that the application that's gonna have this connection, right, with the application registration, is it gonna do it on behalf of the user, or is it gonna do it as kind of at the application permissions? Now the difference is, if I do something for, let's say we have somebody company called John, and John has the application has been given delegated permissions for user read write, which means that the application now can call that function, but it's going to do it with the credentials that John is logging in with. So John logs in, it's going to go through permissions. So this is a way for to say that the application is okay to take that action, but only if the user also has these permissions to flow through. So if John was going to update a user property for something, he can only do it if he has rights to that specific user. It can be himself. He may give us some other delegated permissions that's available in Azure Active Directory and packaging. Anyhow, so that's that. Application is different. Application, it can be wide open, because I'm essentially saying John could still log on to the application, and let's say we didn't do delegated, only application permissions. Well, when John logs in, we're like, great, he logs in, I know he's here, he can get access to the application. But when the application does something to make an update to the user, it does it at the application level. Why would you want to do this? Well, sometimes you'd want to create an application, like let's say you do something in Power Platform and you create a Canvas application, and you want John to be able to do something on behalf of his subordinate. So, oh, you're his manager, that's cool. You go ahead to set out of office. Now that's what the app is going to do, and then through approval process or what have you, when it's time to take action, the app is the one that says, hey, I need to take this action in the graph. Please update that person's properties, whatever that might be, and it will work. This is one way to control things at the application level, but not necessarily have to give John direct access, because we don't want to go into the portal or PowerShell. So he doesn't really have rights to do it, only through the app. But the application needs to make sure that we are controlling the permissions and doing things. But you can see it's not very granular. So can you read it all, or can you rewrite it all? So you got to be really careful of what application you're doing, and then checking on it, which I will talk about later on. There's a link down here that you're going to see with the permissions reference. A lot of great stuff. You're going to see exactly these things. There's a table at the very bottom, big long table of things, which is very useful. And I'm going to show you an example of how you can leverage that through Power BI to essentially connect that information with the application exports. Anyway, user permissions, application permissions. These are key things, and they apply in multiple places. Now, first off, one of the things that we want to make sure we leverage inside of Azure Active Directory is, by default, when you do things in Azure Active Directory, and it depends, like when you buy, service through Agile IT, we'll turn on or turn off whatever we need to go do. But in this particular part, you want to be able to say, hey, when somebody's trying to get an application, and let's say, oh, we love Monday.com, and somebody's like, I want to start using this. Well, we want to turn on this specific setting so that the user can say, I want to use this. Monday.com says, great, I need to fetch your email information, right? Your email information, and I want to do more things. And this is a place to put a stopgap so IT can say, wait a minute, do we really want to go do this? And the reviewers don't actually have to be a global admin permission. So you can say here, either for a specific role, a group of people, or here in this case, one user, that when a request comes in, they'll go through the process. They'll go to the website. They'll click on it, and they'll say, "We need this," and the user's going to say, "Yes, I want to do it." And they'll say, "Oh, your admin needs to approve of this." Admin gets an email. This user gets an email. They're not even admin. Could be a compliance officer. Could be the IT manager who doesn't really want to have rights to that. Whatever that might be, they can click approve, and then the consent will move forward. So there's different ways to configure, but this is the first place that you should do. It is annoying for users, which is exactly what you want. Because one, you want to approve what the consent is. And at the same time, even if somebody is an admin, a global admin that goes through it the first time, going through that, through the application vendors, it'll say it needs to be approved. So you don't get to actually walk around it. You still have to go approve. Well, I'm a global admin. I can go in and still approve it if I want, which you can, but it's an extra barrier, and it's tracked. So now if somebody goes through and gets the application request, here's an example of like Cisco, and somebody said, if you clicked on requested by, it would show what user did it. And you can see like, oh, here was the request. When the request was created, we just didn't clean them out. It's still in there. see what the URIs are going, but what is it going to do? Well, when you click the review permissions and consent, first thing it'll ask you to log in, which I don't show here. And then this one will say, well, here's what it wants to do. This is extremely important because for all the information it wants to get, this one's pretty limited, so it's not bad. But you'll want to see in here if there's anything that'll say application level or whole organization. So this is extremely important. So having that thing in the middle is key. But the second part is know what you're looking at here. Don't just click accept, because there's one other capability, which I'll talk about later on, which is the offline profile, which can hold that key even further. So if you're, so in this level, this is somebody like a vendor, Cisco WebEx Scheduler has created a integration with Azure Active Directory directly. So when you click accept, it's actually going to go to their tenant and say, yep, these guys are good. And then I'll be able to see this application now inside of my enterprise applications. So now that's where it exists. I'll talk about some of the other mechanics here, but having the stopgap, having an approval process, it's tracked, which is important. If you're doing anything in compliance, super key. And now you can click accept and it'll go forward. So that's one area of controlling it and having access. So now I'm going to jump to a kind of walking through how some of these pieces build up and a little visual of pointing it all together. So one thing to note, when you create an application registration, I'm just looking at a simple example here. It's a fun name, Puncher or whatever. But so the things that's in here is when we create an application registration, one thing you'll note, it says application client ID. This is one of the pieces that the developer, or whether you're doing in Power Apps, which is one of the key of information. Normally there's 3 keys that you need: your tenant ID, your application ID. Hey, I'm showing Agile IT's tenant ID. There's a way to query it online. Everybody can get access to your tenant ID. It doesn't matter. Still have to log in, register, all those things. So it's okay. So here's the application ID, the tenant ID. The third part is then how do you authenticate, right? So there's different ways to handle that, and I'll show that here in a little bit. The reason this is key, that the client ID, is that it's not unique in the whole environment, because it is also shared and is the same one with the enterprise application, which I'll show in a little bit. So that's one thing to note, is that this is not a unique identifier. The other thing is that the display name is also not a unique identifier. I can create multiple Agile IT Puncher applications, which might be something you want to do, be confusing, but you could create one that would be specifically for development and one that's for production. Could you use the same for both? Sure can, but I'll explain why maybe that's not such a good idea. So there we have the application identity. This is an application registration. You get to it by going into the Azure portal, Azure Active Directory. You're going to click on app registrations, which is shown there in the top left-hand corner, and then you can create one, or you can view the one that's there already. So now we have this app registration. Doesn't do anything yet. So the next thing really is, how are we going to authenticate? Now, one of the ways that the authentication works is based off of, here there's different platform types. The 2 most popular are mobile, desktop, and web, but I'm going to focus on the web one. First off, you're going to see, geez, why would you even have HTTPS localhost or HTTP localhost? Well, I'll tell you, there's some applications that required for initial application registration. It's often used for software development. Normally they'd have like localhost :44328. It randomly gets generated if you're doing things in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. Anyway, they need to put that in there in order to do the development in their application, but also your production ones. Now that's key in there, because when they put the information from this app registration into their code and their application and wire it up and run it, it will, it's running on localhost or local computer. But it will still want to register. It'll still want to say, hey, I need to authenticate you with Azure Active Directory. You gave me this tenant information. I'm going to authenticate it, and then I'm going to send you back. Well, I'm not a production public web server. It's got to come to my local computer. So localhost makes sense. But again, ongoing for your production, maybe not such a good idea. And I'll explain that here a little bit in a few. So now we create our application registration. We said, here's our redirect URI so that my local development can work, or my production URLs that I can put in here. And there's actually different types of that as well. If you're doing SPA applications, single page applications, like a React application versus Blazor or whatever that you might be using. So now we're getting to the point, we have our app registration. We know what our URL redirect will be. So when we put all this into our app, it'll know how, Azure AD will know how to come back to us. Now we get into permissions. Remember, delegated versus application. In this particular example, we're saying that we want to just be able to get delegated access for user.read. Now, currently in the tenant, this one says admin consent. No, we don't really need it. We're allowing it. You can actually go to that other setting that I showed earlier that said admin setting. You can go to user settings as well for something like this and restrict that. You can say, I want to approve some people, or I don't care what they do. I don't want them to approve anything ever, which I would say in a compliant environment, maybe that's a good thing, but sometimes they're using other tools, so maybe it's not. You have to make your own decisions, but you can clamp that thing down as you need to. This particular view of it is when we're building something to integrate with, either because we have a third-party product or a service that tells us we need to have this to put into the configuration, which is fine. But even once you do this, it still needs to get approved, and then it adds on enterprise apps, which I'll show in a second. So this is the part where I'm saying for this application, these are the permissions, whether it's a collection of delegated, a collection of applications. It can be both, and your application would need to know when to make the calls and when to go through it. But it should be reviewed. That little link there you see at the bottom, or here where it says, to view and manage consent permission, blah blah blah, and you click on this link, it's going to go to the next part that that I'll talk about. Very, very convenient. I forget about it sometimes, but so now this is where we set our permissions. And then lastly, same inside of the application registration, you go to certificates and secrets. Now this is the part where you're going to tell the application, hey, when you go authenticate to the service, we know the client ID, we know the tenant ID, so we know this, but how does it know who we are? Well, shouldn't that URL redirect? Yeah, that's part of it, but you aren't alive yet. So we have to give it a secret. Now there's a place where once you get it, and here you can see there's lots of options on dates, and even a custom you can go out further. You get a secret. As soon as you put it in, one time you get to see it right in the portal. If you ran a script, I mean, obviously just dumps it down on the screen or a file, but you get one time to get it. You can't see it again. You will get a secret ID for it, which I'll talk later on how to use that from a process perspective to make it easy to find. But now you get a secret, and the name description is whatever you want to type it. Conrad wants this. Conrad wants this. Departmental. Power platform. It could be dev. It doesn't matter. Whatever that is, you have this secret, and it's just a little string. Powerful little string. It all comes down to passwords. You call it whatever you want. And then you got to think about how do we manage it. Now for applications, you really should look at things like the key vault for a few reasons. One, because it's a stored to secure area, you should fetch it on demand. You can actually have the application understand how it's allowed to get it, fetch it in order to go through things. Because remember, this application can use that secret not only in the current tenant, but any other tenant that might subscribe to it if it was a multi-tenant environment. Anyhow, so now we have our secret. We should store it someplace safe, and now it's there. And you can see when you say it expires on, there's an expiration. Man, there could be a lot, and I'll show you a few to kind of get there. So now that we've done all those things, and I'm a developer, whatever application, we've done our app registration. Now in this particular case, I'm a developer and I put it in this app service. I'm using some blob storage things, I put a SQL. That app service you could replace with a virtual machine that's running on-prem. So yes, you could do that as well. Running in AWS, same configuration that goes into Power Automate. So it's the same info, just in this context, it's in an app service. So you put it in your app settings.json or web.config, whatever you put it in there. And now we've done the first two parts, but now we want to do some type of consent. Now remember earlier on when I showed you that was the WebEx one, where when you first fired up the application, even though I granted it, it's going to say, hey, I need you to approve it. So you go through the same web process, kind of like I talked earlier. And once that gets approved, whether you have that as an automated task for approval or not, now we have an enterprise application. So inside of Azure Active Directory, in the left, same place where we had the app registration, there'll be enterprise applications. And I'm sure nobody here memorized it, but I'm going to tell you that's the same ID. That client ID, that application ID is the same of what they call the client ID in app registration. They're the same. And this becomes interesting when we do things like conditional access, which I'll talk about in a bit. So now this application is here. Now I can start targeting, what users should use this? And I can do that with users and groups and roles. Who's going to own this? And now it's kind of at this particular level. It's still in Azure AD. Why are they different? Well, because I could have done that authentication because it was a WebEx or another company like Exclaimer, Cloud Radio, and they offer a service. I like it. I click a button, it connects. And for those applications, I would only see them in enterprise applications. There would be nothing in app registration. The app registration actually belongs in their tenant. So anything in their application that they have a secret or certificate, that one secret or certificate can be used to authenticate against any other of the customer tenants that have accepted that. So one question to ask your vendors are, how do you guys manage your secrets? How often do you rotate them? Are they the same for all customers? How are you protecting it? Valid questions, right? Should be in Azure Vault. Our developers never get access to it. We have a separate ops team. The people that are able to change that or access it are on a different team. We log those. Those would be good answers to hear from the vendor. So this is one of those kind of tips and tricks is, if you're going to do this, especially the more permissions they're going to need. Oh, they're just doing user read name. That's not a big deal. But they're doing the other one, especially application permissions. So again, when you approve that, now we have to start thinking about, is that the right thing? And now if we look at the permissions in the enterprise applications for the same application name, same GUID, now we can see those permissions that are there. But one thing you can't do is remove them. You can't remove them. There's tricky ways in order to remove them out. They pretty much get added up, and up. And an application can start off, good application developers will start off limited, and as you needed more services, permissions, it would ask you to consent again and again and again. You've already consented the application, but it would still need admin consent. Who can create, by the way, who can create application registrations? Global admins and application administrators. So if you think, oh, application administrator, that's our dev. I wouldn't do that. I would keep somebody who is very, very particular on permission settings and delegates, do it for them. It's not something you should do all the time and manage all the time, but something to be really, really mindful of. So here's a little query that we have, and I just kind of protect the identity of the instance here, but this is a KQL language. So, if you have Azure Active Directory set up to do logging with Log Analytics, we do this for, a number of our customers that we do onboarding with for Azure Active Directory. Really good, you really need it for compliance. But now there's a simple query, just only 60 days, you can do longer. And really what we're looking for is, what applications that people have been logging into. Because I may want to cross-reference this, you see that application ID and how useful, and I can get counts with actually the list of applications I do have. Because we can have expired certs or not certs, but if nobody's logging into it, then they're kind of a key target to go do that. We have different processes and ways to help customers, kind of go through that. But something that you can leverage Log Analytics, because every time they log in, it captures an event. So now we can say, hey, are people even using this application? It has way too much access than we need. It's got some expiring certificates. These are the tools that you need to go have to go do that. Let me just share one thing here. Where's my share button here for the applications? And I'm going to share here. This is just, so here's just Visual Studio Code. I'm just using it as a glorified text editor here. It's prettier than Notepad. And so in here I have two different types of exports from JSON. We have something called automation library that helps us export lots and lots of this information and store it. Good for reviews, audits, compliance, all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, you can see here there's a lot of data that you would see in here. So this is the same puncher app that we're talking about. Some of the redirect URLs that were there, you'll see them here. You'll see the scopes here. So here's the issues, right? Is that this resource ID of what type of scope that I'm going to use for it. So this is a delegate scope. Like, what is that? And to try to do that for hundreds, of applications inside, it could be daunting. I'll show you kind of a quick little thing to go do if people are interested, reach out. So that's one thing. So again, and this is the JSON directly exported from the graph with no pre-filtering and anything, but it's important to go do that, and there's a PowerShell commands to make that run. Maybe we'll put that online when we post this online. And the other is we look at the application. So you'll see that they'll have different IDs because that makes them unique, but the app ID will be the same between both. So you really want to be able to look at this, and one is the sign-in audience. So this one is very important. So when you do an Azure Active Directory application, if somebody goes, hey, you can do my tenant or multiple tenant. It might be fun if I do multiple tenants. Always start with your own tenant. If you're a SaaS application, that might be different. But until you're ready to secure it once people log in, this is a part that's been security alerts that have been sent out. That's saying you may inadvertently be exposing your applications to attack. So if I have this application, it's web application, I say multi-tenant multi-tenant kind of thing, somebody can actually take a token that they've logged into, because this all goes into the browser, right? These are all kind of the token hacks, and they've actually logged into another application. They've taken that same was it the JWT token, web token, and apply it to your application and inadvertently get access to your application. And because you don't have roles defined, they might be seeing more than what you want. So making sure that you have that is key. And one quick little note too is that enterprise applications are also referenced as service principals. So they're kind of the same. It's the same call that you would make to go get both. So anyhow, these are paired up. So this is just an exported JSON from it, you know, that you can see. And there's a lot of detail. Not everything you need all the time, but some have a lot. So just to give you a little showing of this, is that, and hopefully you should see, yeah, okay, good. So this is just a quick little Power BI that I put together, taking all of that data, and here what it shows is I can see what applications were created by what year. So we've been, you know, picking up the pace here in the applications. Power BI is now I can click on it and see what's there. I can, you know, see what applications, you know, are you know, were connected when, which ones did we have. So just one view of it. Hey, how many of them have been given explicit grants of rights onto the token issuance? So I could do true, you know, I could do false. So I can see which one of these has the ID token, which is a security thing that you have to go through it. How would you do this for 199 application registrations? Quite a bit. The other kind of views here, and again, all this data is in here. That one registration table that I had talked about, or that one permissions table, I said, here's the link, go all the way to the bottom, lots and lots of stuff. So Power BI, you can give it a URL and it'll pull it, and now it's a data set. So now it's just there and it'll refresh whenever I refresh this. So these are all the permissions that are there. And then I just looked at all of the applications we had, the different permissions, so I can see which ones are used the most. You actually click on it and see which applications has that particular type. Hey, what about application types? So how many are they using at the application level? Oh, here we go. This is the list that have application access that's there. And I can see how many of them are localhost, these applications. So here's the thing. So some of these, you know, they're dev platforms, so there's not such a big deal. But if you're doing a lot of production things in your environment, you know, one of the things is, well, you could use that one app registration to go do it. The problem is that now you have that localhost URL, somebody can figure it out, maybe figure out some of your other pieces, and they're going a little bit more forward. And it's a good way to separate your developers. They normally have different development servers for CI/CD. They can easily put it in their environment variables for dev and staging. Super easy if they're doing a lot of, you know, applications through .NET or whatever. There's lots of ways to do it, to be able to target differently. So when it goes to production, they use the production URLs, and their app registration doesn't include any localhost. So it really allows you to refine who gets what and where. So, you know, that's key. And then lastly, you know, again, if you look at all those certificates, remember those certificates that we did, keys and what have you. So this is just another quick view of being able to look at start date, end date, and go, hey, well, you know, where are the ones that are ending, you know, on 2023 on this date. Oh, there we go. And then I can start to want me to click on it or something. Yeah, then I can start to look at which ones are ending from there to this date, which is in the past. Maybe I should go through those and click on. If the cert ends, you know, is it the worst thing in the world? Well, it's just bad to have bad cert. So here you can see it's a little, you know, not so great, but you can go back and delete them. But even more so, knowing which ones are coming up, so you to prevent downtime and things you're going to need to go do there. But it's just a view of being able to use Power BI with the data you can export from the graph, and you can actually pull in some of the other data from the log analytics directly into this. I just don't have it to show at this particular moment. Okay, about to wrap it up here. So, one of the things that we had talked about, we had that puncher application, create an app registration, put in my app, did the consent. I'm pulling logs to see when people are using it. But now I want to protect it even further, because this particular application is really only for Agile IT people. It's just a demo app, but it's only for Agile IT people, and it's so important. Like, let's say it did something so critical, and I wanted to make sure I authenticated them again. If they walked away from the machine more than an hour, then I want to, make them re-log in again. That's the session controls. So here inside of conditional access, you can actually get through this in the enterprise view as well. But if you went through this way, Azure AD, security, conditional access, policies, I can target specifically for this application and say that I can even say that in this policy, here's who I'm going to allow, and then I can create another one that says, here's who I'm going to block. So now I can tie, it's like, well, wait a minute, shouldn't the application do permissions? Sure, it could, but I can, and it's probably off of a group, and I can do it off the same group, but now I can protect it even before it gets to the application. So Azure AD with conditional access, with the application registration, will put it. If you look behind the scenes at the conditional access policy that gets configured, it'll actually have two entries. It'll put the one for app registration and the one for enterprise applications. Why both? Because they both exist. They're the same client ID, by the way, so that's the tricky part of it. But some applications only have an enterprise one. That would be my tenant, which would be, same thing for the WebEx or something like that. But for our own apps, we can protect it really fine. So that ID that's down there, 68E, same when we saw it at registration, same when we saw it enterprise applications. So, when we think about that multi-tenancy, that key, that security is the same one that's in where the app service or the app registration exists. And as you consent on the enterprise application side, you get to say, oh, when people log in, who should do what conditional access, but the key and the value to go get that is actually stored at the vendor, or, if you have multiple tenants and you're doing crazy stuff like that, it would resist over there. So asking the vendor, asking your developers is going to be key. So remember, one of the things that I talked about, I've kind of covered all these topics, but the one is offline access. So when they're doing registration, both in approving and adding scopes, right? They can start off limited and add more and more scopes. The one thing to look at when you're approving is this thing called offline access, because what that does is it's going to give the application a refresh token that's good for, I think it's good for about 60 or 90 days. And the application can now do background calls, with that refresh token they have, which is a string. They still have to have the client ID secret. So it's not like, oh, if I have that, anybody gets it. No, they still have to have the other secrets, the URLs that they have still get redirected. So it's still pretty safe, but it means the application can do background work, which might be what you want, but I'm just saying be mindful of it when you see those sorts of things. So I covered a lot of pieces in here. Hopefully they were helpful or give you ideas of what you need to look at, what you should do for security to do those areas. Maybe you want to reach out to us and talk about, these scripts we have that can pull this stuff in Power BI. We have other reports, because it's a tough task and it's always moving. So both you want to be able to collect it, you want to be able to analyze it, and then you want to be able to take action on it. But, understanding what you're looking for is key. When we'll have this recorded, we'll end up put on a blog post as well. We'll try and put additional links and maybe a little guidance in there to kind of help you out as well. But hopefully, this is also giving you more clarity. Oh, the one thing I forgot to mention was when you get that key and that secret, right? So we created that secret or certificate, and you have this little descriptive name. Once you get it back, there's actually a secret ID. It's just some ID they give you. It's whatever else. There's two things you can do. One, create a tag that's both on that app registration and on the application that's going to use it, if it's in Azure, and put that same tag name or whatever that is on the key vault, so that when you know it's going to expire, you can use that tag to find everything else that's going to need to get updated. The other thing about putting it into the vault is that if the applications are using it, it's going to expire soon. You can't refresh it. You have to create a new one, but now this is the one place. People bury it in their code or put it into a database. It's hard to go find. It creates downtime, and it's hard for an audit too. It's like, where is this? Like, I don't know. So just another kind of key point. So hopefully this gave you some ideas of what to turn on, what to look at, what to analyze. You can't avoid it. There's a place where problems can happen, but you have to have a discussion with people as they get access to it, and you need to continue to monitor it and see what's up there. So hopefully it's got you for there. And with any time left, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Conrad, and thanks for sharing great insights on Azure AD applications. We have received a question, but have responded privately. So I guess we can wrap it up. We would like to thank everyone for joining and staying with us today. And we hope to see you again in the future and explore new IT investments. Stay tuned and keep learning. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.